right, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. And today we are talking with Mark DiFraia, the owner of 440 Marketing, and we'll be talking about messaging and positioning. So, Mark, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and 440?
Sure thing. And thank you for inviting me to participate. Been looking forward to this for a little while. So it's good to get back together and to walk through some of this with you all. So 440, the name kind of throws people a little bit sometimes, but it kind of reaches into some of my music background. I'm a musician since I'm a little kid. And I've always seen this overlap between how musicians prepare to deliver a performance and how organizations build marketing and deliver messages through their organization to their target audiences. And I thought there was something to build off of with that. So 440 refers to a tone, a 440, that a band might use to tune all their instruments before they get started in a performance. If they didn't tune, they would sound terrible and you'd walk out. When they tune up real nice and tight, they sound fantastic and they really deliver the performance they intend to deliver. So that's a little bit of the messaging roots behind what 440 is all about. From a marketing career perspective, I've always been a communications first marketer in that I've always enjoyed the public speaking or PR work or other forms of one-to-one communication where I'm able to tell a story. And for me, it was always critical to have a really tight message infrastructure behind me so that I could go ahead and do those things with confidence. So when I had the opportunity to form the company and put this together, I really wanted it to be galvanized around starting with a rock solid messaging framework that could then drive everything else that an organization might want to do with their marketing and communications.
I love it. I love it. It really is a foundational piece. And I think the audience would agree that it's often something that people struggle with. Sometimes it's because they're too close to the business and they have a hard time having an outsider view of it. And sometimes it can be because they focus on the wrong things, maybe focusing on features instead of outcomes. And when we were preparing for this recording, one of the things that you had shared with me is that you really do try and start with having the outcomes, the business outcomes in mind as one of the foundational pieces for how you engage with people for their messaging.
Absolutely. And as a rule of thumb, we really won't engage a customer that doesn't have the appetite to go through the message building framework, because in my opinion, everything that we do afterwards is going to relate back to those messages. So if we're going to build collateral or websites or speaking points for speakers or sales presentation materials, and the foundation of them is not rock solid, we're essentially just wasting money and time with messages that we don't know are going to resonate. So I really don't like starting projects with anybody that doesn't take the time to hit the pause button and start around messaging. And you're right. The first part of that is a start with the desired outcomes, because not every company's in the same place, right? They may be desperately searching for investors, or they've already got a good group of investors. They've got their early adopters, and now they're trying to get their first wave of what you would call maybe their first real wave of production clients, if you're talking in software terms.
Yes.
Those outcomes all drive what the messaging needs to be about, and ultimately what kind of tactics we might use and things like that as well. But
That makes sense. So can you share a little bit about what kind of framework you use? Because obviously it sounds like you have a methodology that you bring to the table that really helps you facilitate this process with a client. Help us understand a little bit more about what's the scope of that and what does it look like? How is it to go through this process with you?
yeah, well, from a look and feel perspective, it's going to be a lot of interviews. It's going to be one-to-one communications. I try to talk with everybody I possibly can at varying levels of the organization. I may be spending time directly with a CEO or a CMO, even CFOs on down to product managers and others like that, to get from them what they think the story is, what they think is important, who they think they're competing with, what they think the basis of competition is. And you'd be surprised how often that yields disconnects between what all the parties that you think are already been sitting around the same table planning together would have already come to agreement on, but it does point out where those gaps are, and it's a real chance to fix them. But from a framework perspective, through all those one-on-ones and small group settings, we do climb a ladder of identifying what those desired results are going to be. Are we looking for sales results? Are we looking to become known and nobody knows who we are right now? There's a lot of things that go into that, but desired results, getting those documented and agreed upon. Then we go into the next bit, which is talking about levels of messaging. Okay. Levels of messaging really talks about brand level messaging, who we are as a company or an organization, but you could also be talking at the service line or product line level as well. Larger companies probably have the budget and the bandwidth as well as the gravitas, I guess, if you would, in the market to have both brand and product level messaging sorted out. Oftentimes I tell smaller companies like startups not to get too cute here, especially if they're a one product company or a one platform company, maybe to stick to a single product line level messaging framework. And then next is we look at audiences. Who are we trying to influence? We obviously need to know who our buyer is. Where do they get their budget from? If there's a technical component, is there a technology leader that needs to endorse what it is that we're trying to sell? Do we ever impact the ability for our clients to generate revenue? Hopefully the answer is yes, because that makes selling a lot easier. The answer is yes. Who is that person? And then finally, you may be also trying to attract investors or analysts in your market. But whatever the case might be, there's probably 3 to 5 of them that really need to be understood. If you know what they need, then we know what kind of stories we're going to have to tell.
I love that. Do you actually develop, like I do, one of the things that I do is I develop an actual formal persona and describe demographics, psychographics, behaviors, where they spend their time, how they think, what they care about, all of those sorts of things. Is that part of that process for you?
Yeah, it sure is.
Understanding the audience?
Sure is, yeah. The more real we can make these audiences feel, because sometimes it feels too academic to people, right? And that's probably a good aside. One of the other foundations of starting this company was to be as frugal as we could possibly be. We don't want to spend a lot of time wasting effort on overdeveloping materials, overdeveloping personas, overdeveloping things that become wasteful. But one of the things that I found helped me over my whole career was being able to empathize with the person in the chair. So we'll have conversations sometimes with a client about, think about the person you're calling to make that pitch. You know, that person, are they working from home remotely? Are they in an office? Are they hybrid? What other concerns are on their table? Is there a big industry show coming up next week? Are they part of some industry boards? What responsibilities they have within the company? They have a couple of kids at home that are in middle school. When you understand like what the day looks like to these folks, then you realize you're trying to find a way to stick your story in the middle of it all and have it shine enough that they want to spend some time and attention with you. It changes the way you look at personas. That's why we spend the amount of time with it that we do, so that you can really have an appreciation for what I'm up against, when I'm trying to hit them in a place where they're going to open up and want to hear our story.
Yeah, that's really important. I know some of the projects that you and I have worked together on in the past, because we do have a shared history. Some of those projects involved really getting inside the mindset, but then also using the words that were appropriate to that audience, right? So right. We're talking about privacy and security or sovereignty, authenticity, all those kinds of things where we really found those really powerful words that then also resonate with the buyer. And you can only do that really if you understand who the buyer is, who the stakeholders are, so that you can use the language that really resonates with them, so that they think, oh, okay, this company understands me. They understand what I care about. They care about the same things that I care about.
Right. Absolutely. And how many times have we seen technology groups fall into the trap of over communicating tech?
Right.
To every audience, right? You know, yeah, it's really great whiz bang technology you came up with, but the person who's going to write the check maybe is more financially savvy and doesn't understand the depth of the technology and doesn't care to, right? So save that for the technology audience, give the value prop guy what he needs to hear. Or for an investor, they care more about, is there a market fit, and is there something you can talk about that proves it?
That proves it. Yeah, the proof part is really important, whether it's social proof, testimonials, case studies, whatever it is, being able to tie into that as part of the messaging. If you can talk about real results that companies have had using whatever the product or solution is, that is a really great part to be able to put in the messaging pillar if you can. But you can't always do that, especially if it's a startup or someone new and it's unproven.
Right.
But certainly once they have a track record, there's an opportunity there to pull in some of that messaging.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm curious, how do you collaborate with a client who really just doesn't understand some of the core communications skill sets, et cetera? So over my career, I've worked with 15, 20 years worth of working with technical founders who don't necessarily have a business background. And so when it comes time to kind of measuring business outcomes and talking about value creation, they kind of struggle sometimes with those things because they do want to talk about the tech. How do you train them, educate them in the process? Because you don't want to just do it all yourself on their behalf, because then you go, they don't necessarily have the skill sets or the mindset to then carry it forward. So how do you get them thinking those ways so it becomes part of their organizational DNA and they can spread it into other areas of their business, like human resources with recruiting, get the right messaging in their annual reports? Like, you really want this to become part of their process and part of their skill set as an organization.
I find it takes a lot of one-on-one time, because in a group setting, it's awfully challenging, because especially you mentioned like a tech company where the founder is probably the lead product officer or the original innovator that came up with the big idea that is ultimately driving what the company's all about. So there's a lot of personal capital wrapped up in the work that's been done to date, the stories they've been telling to date, how they articulate where their value is. And in a group setting, we always want to prop that up, right? What we're trying to do here is by no means tear down, rebuild, or change what their mission was or what they're trying to do. Instead, we're trying to properly reward what they've done with the appropriate amount of sales response, right? This thing should generate the kind of revenues that your mind-blowing innovation demands. And that's all we're trying to do here. We're not trying to change what your product was or change what your vision was, but we may need to do some tuning about how to get the story into the buyer's mind in a way that gets them to act the way that we need them to in order to get the performance where it needs to be. That's typically where I think a lot of one-on-one time with whoever that founder is yields the most fruit, because then you can talk peer-to-peer. As you know, people value this, that, or the other thing, and they'll agree with you, and you can get them to collaborate, and we build ideas together, and then we're co-authors. But they can be proud of the fact that they had a hand in it, plus they were never really stepped over. And there's really no reason to step over them. They do know their market better than I'm going to know it. Coming in here to help them, I do rely on their root knowledge, and sometimes need to rearrange things a little bit in the way that the story is told. Sometimes the hardest thing I've found for tech leaders is making their market smaller. And it's where the gold is. I recently went through this with a customer that felt they were competing with the 800-pound gorilla of their market. Yeah. And after some homework with product people and others around the table, it became clear to me that they were competing on a component. And it turns out if you had that 800-pound gorilla's product, they were automatically excluded from the prospect list because they already had one of these and it came with the kit. So really we needed to find people that didn't have that. And it was very hard for that leader to back off of the fact that they didn't compete with that other entity. They really wanted to be in the ring with the big dogs fighting the big fight. But so that's all well and good, but your sales are going to be over here. Mm-hmm. And the more tight we can get and the more exact we can get about who it is that we're targeting, the less money we're going to waste spraying messaging and advertising and all kinds of lead generation all over the place when the customers live here. And sometimes that's hard to get people to wrap their head around because everybody has the vision of like world domination. But the smaller we can make our target market, the more likely we are of being able to address it and get them to act the way we want them to act.
I really like that. I know, at least with startups, I try and help companies focus on what I call the smallest viable market.
Yes.
You can expand beyond that, but the key word is viable. Like,
Right.
making sure that there is a good fit there and a good opportunity so you can get off to a good start. But there's a lot to be said for a land and expand strategy. And there's a lot to be said for just doing something rather finite, but doing it so well that it's just a stellar experience for the customer. And then you can go from there. If you're going to have product enhancements or you're going to create tertiary products, you're going to wind up with a product portfolio instead of an independent solution. That's great. And then you come back to the table again with messaging for that now broader experience and broader value proposition. And it can happen. It just doesn't need to all happen at once.
Right. There's just not enough resources. I mean, there's very few companies that are capitalized such they could go after markets that big and expect to have success with it. Really focusing those resources and getting yourself in the room where those buyers are is the name of the game. And that kind of bleeds into one of the other themes about repeating the messaging without apology. You don't have to hit them with something different every time. In fact, I don't want you to. I want you to say the same things all the time and get really good at being succinct about how you do it, because the likelihood that they're going to hear you is low and repetition is going to be key.
Yeah, I've heard that back in the day when I first started and when I had my agency back in the 80s, they used to say, people need to hear your message 7 times before they take action. Well, now they're saying it's 20, 30, 40 times because there's such a din, in particular of social messaging, right? There's just a lot out there, and it's very, very difficult to stand out from the noise. And so to the degree that you can have a really strong, powerful message and say it consistently over and over and over again, it helps you hit that resonance that it's going to take for people to take action. Whereas if they hear lots of things about you, they really don't know where to focus, and you don't really have that takeaway for them where they associate you with.
It's not recognizable. They don't say, oh, I know those guys. I've heard that story. I know. Or when the time comes that the need arises that they need the thing that you have, they've heard it and they can call it back and say, well, I think I heard something about this company offers something like that. Maybe we should look them up. But if every time you tell the story, you tell it for the first time, like a different way every time, then every time you tell the story is the first time, and the likelihood everybody's going to hear it is just too low. And it's a waste of resources, effort, people, capital, all that stuff.
All of that makes sense. All of that makes sense. So earlier in the conversation, you mentioned really trying to make sure that your messaging is meeting your buyers where they are. Do you ever do any focus groups, or do you recommend that companies do focus groups with the target end customer and kind of test out messaging or get feedback? Have you ever done a project like that, or do you recommend that companies do things like that?
I've done some of that work with third parties where we get behind the glass wall and put the product on the table and let everybody fidget around with it or give their feedback on it. I tend to find that those were more consumer-oriented conversations where the messaging was going to be very much mass media and it was going to be about the behaviors of the consumer. Most of my work is B2B, right? So, or B2G, government related as well. So it doesn't really ever get, now you're fortunate enough to be able to do a lot of A/B testing and things like that using digital tools. So the need to engage in that old school focus group is really, I still think it's something kind of relegated to the consumer world than it is for B2B and B2G. So I don't do it that much anymore, but I have done it. And it's always an eye opener because you think you got it figured out. You think you know what they're going to say. And then they blow you away every single time with perspective or a thought that challenges one of your core assumptions, and you have to go back and revisit. It always does happen, but it's awfully expensive. So I tend to engage around A/B testing and things like that.
Okay, makes sense. So once an organization has, let's say that they've gone through the process, they've done the workshopping, they've developed the messaging pillars, they're feeling good about it. How do they then activate that messaging? And then, so that's part one of the question. And then part two of the question is, how do you make sure that everybody in the organization is singing from the same song sheet? Because one of the things that's super, super important, it's not just sales that needs to have the right messaging or marketing that needs to have the right messaging. You need client success, field service, whoever it is, everybody who touches the customer has to be able to give the right feeling, say the right thing, have the right takeaways. So how do you recommend that companies accomplish that?
Well, there's a couple things. Once we have the messaging pillars in place, those 3 to 5 big block letter kind of pillars, then we go into statements and examples, right? This is where we start building that laundry list of might be a tagline or brief statement or a headline or phrases and the keywords that we want to use. And they kind of sit there as they may be used as they are written in some cases in collateral or fact sheets or product guides or things like that. But they serve as the root for writing or for future work. And one of the things that we'll also do as part of the framework is decide what campaign tools are in play, right? So not everything is for everyone. When we put together a go-to-market plan, there'll be, most people want sales decks and tear off sheets and, or whatever, the glossies, right, that explain the product and the features and the benefits and some sort of leave behinds. Maybe there's going to be campaign mailers, old school postcards. There'll be email campaigns, but we'll go through and make a decision from a very long list of tactics and capabilities, including social media, whether we're using, LinkedIn posts, we're going to use things more like Facebook or Instagram or otherwise. Go through and really just pick from that list what we're going to turn on and what we're going to turn off. And then from that, we're going to go ahead and start creating our editorial calendar, right? That's going to drive when and where all those things are going to happen. Where are our events? Are we going to specific trade shows? What's the walk back off the trade show to start pre-seeding for what's going to happen there for lead gen purposes to make sure we get people to come by and see us and we can generate the leads we're hoping to create. That's a 3-month pre-show walk back of things that have to happen. So once I start laying this out for clients, so that's where the heads start to explode a little bit. But I think of every one of them as a swim lane, right? If we're talking in social media terms, it's going to be very brief. It's going to be sharp and sweet and small, or it's going to be a teaser to a blog post around a subject matter that matters to a specific one of our audiences. If it's a trade show booth, the booth is going to be created parroting the messaging of our brand and whatever products are relevant, and perhaps something point in time if our budget allows. But we're going to align each one of those tactical things that are in our plan with the message and the audience that they're designed for. And that's why I always say, like, none of these things start with a blank sheet of paper, right? If you know we're going to do a LinkedIn post tied to a thought leadership piece that a technologist is going to find interesting, there are going to be roots and elements in that writing that call back to the messaging pillars that were important to the technology buyer. So those nuggets got to be in there, and the headline's got to really reflect the core, the value. In those cases, they may not be in exact verbatim terms, but it's got to be there, and it's got to be a direct correlation that you can tie. It says, yep, that one checks the box. It's on point. It's on message. And there's got to be real policing of it. I've worked for companies that didn't have good control of this in the past, where anybody could hawk a gig of getting themselves behind a microphone at a trade show could say whatever the hell they wanted. And God help you if that's how your company operates. But it happens more often than you think, because it happens a lot. And usually you get lucky that you've got well-intending, good people that tend to rise to those levels that create demand for them to speak at events. But they need to be really well coached to make sure that they're delivering what we need them to be delivering for core messages while they're doing their special deep dive on a subject matter. So there are ways to hold them accountable. One of them is a speaker bureau, which Insider is going to be the next blog post is going to be about speaker bureaus. But you're right also in that organizations forget that a launch includes the help desk. It includes the finance people that might answer a billing call from a client. Everybody in the organization needs to be versed on what those core messages are. How they answer the phone might be part of it. If there is a value around customer service that is a big part of your brand, it should be part of your greeting when you answer the phone. This is XYZ company, your go-to for blah, 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 best care organization money can buy. How can I help you today? There's a way for this to be realized, and the companies that do it well win.
I really like that. Kind of harkens back. There was a television series back in the day called Moonlighting with, I'm trying to
Sybil
think.
Shepherd and
Yes, Bruce Willis. And they had a receptionist that would answer the phone. And of course, every time she would just use some, cute little lingo to position the company. I always get the kick out of that. And, we're missing some of that. And I think one of the challenges that we have now with everything being so digital and optimized and just everything about it, we're losing some of the human to human communication. So when you're doing these engagements, do you have some recommendations for companies that might want to still keep that human touch? That's really important to me. I love digital. I'm all over all the new tech. But at the same time, I think it's really important for businesses to actually have relationships with their customers. If they can do that at scale, even better. But do you have any recommendations for how to implement messaging at a more personal level to kind of help fill that gap?
Sure. I mean, part of the workshopping is that we need, especially our executive team and folks that interact with customers, to really have it so well rehearsed that they can just speak inside. I always thought of it like this. I did a lot of public speaking for the companies that I worked for, and I found that I was doing this work on my own if the company didn't have it already, because I needed somebody to paint the lines on the field for me that let me know that after the event was over or the engagement was over, I checked 3 out of the 5 boxes I wanted to check going in. I always felt like I should have a scorecard after a PR interview or a speaking up or a panel, especially the things that you can't control where it's going to go. Usually a speaking up, you've got pretty good control over it because you wrote it and you deliver it. But on a panel, they can take you anywhere.
Especially if it's moderated, like a moderated panel versus a fireside.
Yeah. Without a doubt. And a reporter can really take you anywhere. So I always felt like if I came out of there making the 3 points I really wanted to make, then I won. If I didn't, then I lost. Every time you engage with a customer or group and you in your head know that there are 3 applicable things that I need this person to hear from me, you find a way inside your conversation to get them out in a strong way, you should walk out of there feeling like you won. You won the meeting. Like that was good. Right? You obviously need the next steps and the follow-ups. But you want to get, whether or not they ever buy from you or not, you want them to hear the things that you rehearsed that are the things that we trust the most to move that person in our direction.
I really like that.
Make a game out of it. You really got to almost make a game out of it. And then as far as the person-to-person things, we do live in kind of like this double-edged world, right? Where we've got AI tools that can do lead gen campaigns for us on LinkedIn and do email campaigns. And we all use Woodpecker and all kinds of other tools and things to allow us to navigate the rules of spamming and not spamming to do lots of email campaign work. And I live on the bubble of, I think we're all tired of that stuff. I mean, it bears fruit, so it continues to get investment. It continues to get used. But I still think there's nothing better than putting yourself in the room with people that ultimately are going to buy these things. So I still believe in trade shows, even more now than I did believe in them before COVID. If there's an organization, a trade group, a market vertical that has a conference series that you can exhibit at or sponsor. I mostly exhibit at. I think it's worth allocating the marketing budget to get yourself in the room with these people. It can be the great equalizer, right? Because your biggest competitor could be on the other side of the room, but you're in the room too.
You're
Right?
in the room at
And
least.
you're in the room, and those same buyers are walking the floor and they want to get informed and they'll stop by. And if you put the effort into really building a compelling presence at a trade show, you will get attention. If you show up and just put up a generic stand and put some people in front of it and paint it blue, you'll get what you get. But if you actually really do invest the marketing resources in developing something special that the people that are attending it can feel is something special and worthy of their attention, then you can really disproportionately perform in that setting. So I've been leaning on that a lot. Get yourself in a room where the buyers are walking around, physically interacting with people. It's so much better than just digital noise.
I really like that and have been able to have a couple of those kinds of events even so far this year, where companies might be up against some really huge, big competition, but because they're there making a splash, doing the pre-show promotion with the right message to the right people, engaging them, again, using the right messaging, prepped in advance. Here's the talking points. Everybody's got it in their pocket on their phone and know for sure they're scripted and they know what it is that they want to drive home. They really can, in some cases, even have, it might be a smaller booth, but might be a better showing because there's more at stake. And so more work goes into the prep. Whereas sometimes the really big enterprises, folks don't take the shows as seriously, or it's harder to get all the right messaging to the right people and get them trained and aligned. And, there's just a lot of baggage that can come sometimes with a really big company. And this is where the smaller and mid-sized folks can really shine and do something.
They can dominate. I mean, really, at any particular event, the smaller guys should have the opportunity to run circles around the big guys. For all the reasons you mentioned, they're weighed down by budget constraints. There's a lot of things competing for those dollars. The desire to build and reuse booth materials. So, we could do really custom stuff, or we could build something generic that just has our branding on it and send it to every show. And we never have to build another one for 2 years. Well, yeah, you can do that. That's great. But then there's nothing special or unique about it. If it's appropriate, Marg, I'll share with you a story of a customer I had a few years back, smaller company into data science oriented work in the fintech space, very small marketing budget, really amazing stuff though, great technology, and a really personable founder and CEO that I felt very confident about. If I could get them in the room, they would do very, very well. And luckily we identified a show here right in our local area. So I was able to get our booth developed around a theme that was one-off just for that event, wildly different concept that spoke to how unique and special we were at the things that we were doing, but it made us the shining star of this smaller event, but we were the talk of the town. Like, have you seen that booth? It's great. You got to go check that out. Nothing that crossed the line to like making us a joke or anything that takes away from the seriousness of the conversation, but we put a lot of imagination into making the analogy of what we were delivering with the story of what our booth was about. And it was a regular size booth, not 3 or 5 or 10 together.
Right.
For the price of that booth, we're also able to get the gentleman who's the CEO to basically be the host of the whole second day of fireside chats and things on the stage. So a very contained investment allowed us to be literally the talk of the town for 2 days. And we walked out of there with probably 50 actionable conversations with the kinds of organizations we really wanted to find. It was a wild success as far as a marketing wins perspective goes. But we did it in a very contained budget. And you know what? With that kind of success, we don't need to do 10 shows a year.
Right.
You don't need to have advertising in the front of the Wall Street Journal. We need to be doing things like that in a contained, smart way, and then following up on it and until our budgets can be bigger. And that to me is a shining example of a modest budget with creativity yielding great results. Because I always told our teams, right? Creativity is free. We can use all the creativity we want. It's not going to cost us anymore unless, we got to print up something wildly crazy. But our people can sit in a room and be creative while their people sit in a room and not be creative. And with the same budget, we'll kill them. We'll win, right? Because we're going to be willing enough to try some things that maybe others won't.
I remember that event because you actually shared with me some pictures after the event, and you're like, "We killed it." And I just remember being so happy for you that was a risk that was worth it, but it was a calculated risk based on what you wanted to communicate to what audience.
Yeah.
It wasn't willy-nilly. It was thoughtful.
We went right down the line, every last detail, every last thing aligned to the theme. But you're right, but we were very frugal about it. I mean, we loaded up our own cars. I picked up the booth at the development shop and put it in my own car, and we got there early and we set everything up ourselves and we broke it down ourselves, and we didn't ship anything. We did it all on our own backs because that's what we had to do. And it worked out fantastically well.
I love that. So small company life and the hashtag startup life.
Right.
Doing what needs to be done in order to get things out there. It's really a great energy, I think, a lot of times.
Yeah.
And a coalescing activity. And if you can have those kinds of experiences around launching new messaging and new creative and all that sort of stuff, it just brings even extra energy to the table. And I think the people who are then at the event, whether they're in the booth or they're the ones who are coming to the booth to visit, I think they feel that energy, honestly. I think that there's
without a doubt. They respect it too, because if they're a member of that organization or they're there because they are working in that space or they believe in the mission of the group or whatever it is, they really take it personally that organization spent some time getting creative around their event. That you did this for us so we could be more approachable to what it is that you're trying to communicate to us. I've always found the audience really respects creativity. They really respect people that put some effort in, and they'll always stop by and give you a look. I don't want to totally disparage the large company thing, though, because another example that you know of, we've also done the same thing in a very large company setting with large budget. And this kind of a story probably is for more of the CEOs of the audience that might listen to this. It's possible to do those things in a bigger company, but it only works when the CEO provides air cover.
Mm-hmm.
We did one years ago where we did a wildly different concept. We wanted to deliver the message to this market that we were the only provider in the space that served the full needs of the client from beginning to end. And so we created a vision for essentially a Whole Foods market. Everything you needed to build the meal was all under one roof. And we did 6 or 8 booth footprint, custom build thing. But the concept and the way we delivered it with product and visuals and training and outfits that we had people wearing and all the services we were delivering on the floor was really unique, and it was really risky. And ordinarily, without a CEO really putting a fence around the team and saying, yeah, we're going to do this, and I'm going to block and tackle for you, because some are like, oh, that might be a little too much. That might be off-putting. It's a little risky. I'm a little embarrassed by that. I don't know if I want to be a part. All the little factions will get together and kind of bring your idea down and distill it to boring if you let them, right?
If you're not let them, but you wind up with something that's safe and unmemorable.
Just like everybody else, right? And in this particular case, we had a big idea, and I went to the CEO with our team and said, look, we're going to pitch you an idea that is totally off the wall, but we think it's going to work. And we think it's really going to drive home that we're the only game in town that you really want to be paying attention to for this. And when we pitched it, the CEO totally got it, made a couple of little tweaks to have some input, And then I said, if we're going to do this, I need you to, we're not going to tell, first of all, we're not telling anybody about what the theme is until we absolutely have to. And at that point, you have to help us block everybody off of it. So we deliver against this without diluting what we're doing. And we got that buy-in and we were able to hold the line and it was wildly successful. So if you're a CEO and you're listening to this and you want to do things like that, it's going to take your effort to make sure that you give the safe space for the marketers to actually be able to do the work that it takes to create those kinds of ideas and execute them.
All right.
But you can do it.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I'd like to talk about performance a little bit. And we talked about measuring to what degree you're meeting the market. And there's those core KPIs of making more money. What's the result of the output? But if there's one or two metrics that a CEO can use in order to know whether or not the messaging is on point, what might that be? How might they know if they're on the right track and if they're having the impact that they wanted to have when they engaged 440 for a messaging project?
So I think there's a couple. I always like to see, some of this comes down to SEO work and what have you, but we need to construct our work product so that we start showing up in searches much, much higher, right? You can't be buried on page 10 of a Google search or whatever, or now that's usually an AI guided search, right? So we have to use some tactics that are going to make sure that whether you're looking at the AI banner of results, that there are hooks that are coming back to stories or sites that you can click the links to that bring you to some of our stuff, or we show up somewhere on that first page is critical. But I think the ultimate barometer of messaging success is incoming interest. If you've developed solid messaging, and that solid messaging is what was used to build your website, it's what you've used to develop your trade show presence, it's driving your social media outreach, people should be coming to you and showing interest. Not necessarily bluebirds, but you should see it on the website with visitors, with folks, if you're exchanging content for information about the buyer, people filling out cards, on the website because they want more information. There should be good examples of folks coming to you with interest. And you should see that escalating if the messaging's working and if the program's working. If not, something's wrong.
Right. Okay. That makes perfect sense. And I know that will make a lot of salespeople happy.
Yeah. Incoming interest is like the best day ever, right? Exactly. I can't tell you how many groups I feel like salespeople have to succeed in spite of whatever the marketing mix is providing for them. Sometimes we put too much on salespeople and that we rely on their relationships and their know-how and being around the market to know how to navigate. And there are lots of examples of companies that have marketing groups that are creating content and materials and things that the sales group finds are not terribly helpful or useful, and they're left to their own devices to try to meet their numbers. Anytime you get this stuff right, sales typically responds in a real positive way because they get the help. This is a little off topic, but an example of it is just being willing to get creative around material sets, right? Too often as a marketing group, all right, well, we're going to need sales decks for our sales guys and girls, and we're going to need product sheets, and we're going to need leave behinds, and we're going to need this, we need that. And we give them all this gear and they don't use any of it. Or we give them a big slide library of pre-approved marketing slides to tell this story and that story. And they're supposed to cherry pick the ones that they need and build their slide deck and go out and tell our story. Well, most of them don't want to walk into their customer and pull out a laptop and start blasting them with PowerPoint, especially if you're a solution salesperson.
That's right.
So what are we giving them? We give them what? They go in and they pick up a marker and they go to the whiteboard. Or they talk to their notes, or they're doing something else. But a whole group of people spent a long time building graphics and slides and backdrops and all kinds of things that go into trying to equip a sales group. And we did something years ago we used to call placemats that were done as a go-between that gave a bigger footprint. This is nothing amazing. An 11 by 17 piece of paper sometimes laminated, sometimes not, that had the whole story on it on the front and on the back. And it something you could put on the table. The customer could take notes on it. The salesperson could tell the story in whatever order made sense for this meeting they were having, because they weren't going through a linear slideshow. They
Right.
could move around the picture and get to everything that mattered in a much more natural way. We also found that worked out really well for executive audiences, governors' offices, and people like that, that you're not going to get more than 12 minutes.
Right.
You're not going to, by the time you set up your laptop, the meeting's over and you lost your opportunity. But that's just an example of, you got to get with them and find out what makes them better equipped to tell the story in the way that they know is most natural for who they're going to be with. And you might get some very different answers about what those materials need to look and feel like.
Yeah, I really like.
Then you're going to have a better chance of keeping them on message too, by the way.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. All of that makes perfect sense. I love it. Okay, so do you have any closing thoughts that you would want to share with the audience about messaging and positioning in general and how to work with 440?
Sure. Well, how to work with me is easy. You can find us at 440marketing.com. There's plenty of places all over the website to just drop me a little note or drop us a note, and we can certainly follow up with you. You can catch me on LinkedIn, Mark DiFraia. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn as well. 440's on LinkedIn. You can find us there too. As far as like parting notes, or if there's anything to call out, I would just say that there's two last bits I think I'd leave you with. One is you got to let the message soak for a while. It's hard to be patient, right? Sometimes we want results right away. And there are plenty of companies that are guilty of the patient always being on the operating table. You need to build your messaging. You need to believe in it. You need to execute with it, and you need to give it time to soak. Maybe annually you revisit it. You take a look at your results and you tune, but you can't be constantly changing them. Otherwise, you have no chance of ever being consistent, right? And then the last bit is, I would say, from a cultural perspective, try to find ways to build some rewards into the culture of the business for people that are sticking to the story, people that are using the messaging the right way, whether it's spot bonuses or Starbucks gift cards for folks that are answering the phone the right way. Maybe there are people like you want to make examples, positive examples of during all hands meetings that are really shining examples of how to put the messaging to work. It could be somebody that did an article with a journalist.
Mm-hmm.
And when you read all the quotes and how the article came out, they really nailed it. It's all right to recognize those people and say, like, this is an example of what it means to set a message and stick to it and deliver it, and really try to reward the people that are doing that and find them throughout the organization so that everybody knows you really care about it and that it's really important that everyone does their best to speak the story of the company.
All right, fantastic. Well, thanks again for spending time with us today. I know that the audience is really going to find everything that you discussed today highly valuable. And hopefully this is something that they can put to practical use. And of course, for everyone who doesn't feel like that's something that they want to try and do by themselves, contact Mark.
Be happy to help. Absolutely. Believe it or not, it's fun for us. So I love walking through these examples and helping people figure out how to tell their story the best way possible. So yeah, feel free to reach out. And Mark, thank you so much for the invitation. We appreciate the opportunity to come on here and do this. I will leave you with, if you're interested in this topic and you go to the website, there's a blog post that we just put out recently that's all about the message, that you'll catch a couple of these nuggets in there as well. So be sure to visit.
All right, fantastic. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye. Bye-bye.